Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. You know, I think it's probably an understatement to say the special session was not as productive as it could have been or that it should have been. Unfortunately, we reached a roadblock, and I would tell you it's a disaster, but not a complete disaster, because House Bill 10 by Representative James passed, which is incredibly important to make sure that flood loss victims, and thank you very much, Ted, can access tax relief from the federal government without having to amend their returns to the state and actually pay more to the state. Also, House Bill 27 by Representative Pat Smith made some necessary changes with respect to telecommunication taxes so that folks who are hearing impaired can access those services. But that's it. That's not why we came here. You know, we tried to build consensus around ideas. I met with leaders in the House and the Senate, rank and file members, Republicans and Democrats and independents over and over and over the last several months. Spent a lot of time with the Speaker, the President. And I said then, have great flexibility as to how we fix the cliff, but not whether we fix the cliff. There's simply too much at stake. And I think it's instructive because much of the information out there has been less than accurate and less than complete about what the cliff actually is. Of $1.38 billion in revenue that falls off the books come June 30th, the cliff is $994 million. So maintaining $994 million would fix the cliff, even though $1.38 billion of revenue would expire. Obviously, that is a net tax reduction, a net reduction of the tax burden, I should say, on the people of Louisiana. And this is something else that people fail to mention. Even at $994 million, it would still require more than $100 million in cuts to next year's budget. That is why the standstill budget that the legislature voted for last year, I think unanimously, would actually cost $150 million more in state general fund than the $994 million that I was trying to maintain. And by the way, the $994 million comes from the REC. That is the difference in the current state general fund forecast for this year and the current state general fund forecast for next year. And what we heard the other day, I think it was Friday night, well, y'all should just take what we can get. No. That should not be our approach. Louisiana's better than that. I would say we should do what we must in order to adequately fund our critical priorities. And I know that this is a hard task. I know that it's unpleasant. Everybody prefers to govern in times when there are plenty of revenue, but that's not the situation that we find ourselves in. It's essential, though, that people, when necessary, summon the courage to fix the problem. That did not happen. And I hope now that the young people, really all people watching, won't give up on Louisiana, because I'm certainly not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to work harder than ever before to achieve consensus and move forward and fix our problems. And I'm encouraging everyone to do that, especially our legislators. You know, we have high school seniors right now debating where they're going to go to college next year. They don't know, they can't know what portion of the TOPS might be funded if they're going to be eligible for TOPS. You have those who are already in higher education, maybe they're sophomores or juniors or freshmen, wondering if TOPS is going to be available to them next year. And of course, their parents are at least a little bit interested in that question too. You know, what about the single mom working 2 jobs out there in a rural area, and she gets sick and needs to go to the hospital? She's not interested in the political party of the doctor. She wants to know the door's going to be open when she gets there. Unfortunately, because of some obstructionists in the House, the legislature has failed those students, failed those parents, failed that single mom, and countless others across the state of Louisiana. Again, I'm going to continue to do everything I can as governor to get us to where we need to be. And to every legislator who worked in good faith to reach a true compromise, who made difficult decisions to resolve our problems as responsibly as possible, please know that I respect and appreciate your efforts, and I say thank you. Please keep that spirit alive. I pray that it becomes infectious and that other people will catch it, because we have to build on it. It is terribly unfortunate, though, because the next several months, we're going to have so much uncertainty in the state of Louisiana that we could have and should have avoided. Now, I know that a majority of legislators want to work across the aisle to fund Louisiana's critical priorities. Simply put, the failure of this special session is the result of a total lack of leadership and action in the House of Representatives, a spectacular failure of leadership in the House. We all knew that it wasn't going to be easy. Bold reform requires courage, leadership, and compromise. The definition of compromise is you're willing to accept some things you don't like in exchange for getting some things that you do. That's what makes it hard. But because it's hard and essential, that's why leaders have to be there pushing people, molding that consensus. It was totally absent in the House of Representatives. You know, the Speaker's proposal to me on February the 5th was that he would support and deliver 40 Republican votes in the House for $572 million in that revenue we needed to maintain, plus the revenue to come from the fiscal reforms, which was additional $302 million. That itself was $120 million short of the $994 million fiscal cliff, but there were other instruments and options available to us to close the difference, and I really thought it represented a good faith effort to come together and move forward and fix the cliff. I then met with the Speaker again at the end of that week and the President and the Senate to confirm each and every one of his proposals and his support for them and his pledge of Republican votes, 40 of them, to pass them. I then sat with the Speaker and the President and drafted a call making sure that every single revenue proposal that he had indicated he supported and every budget reform proposal was included in the call. Unfortunately, the session started 2 weeks ago, and it didn't take long for the Speaker to go back on his word, the very first day. He then said he was only willing to raise an amount of revenue that was $220 million less than he had previously told me. Of course, he continued to insist on the budget reforms, which were always conditioned upon fixing the cliff. And as a result, even the most casual observer of the way the House has conducted itself over the last 2 weeks can only conclude that it was totally dysfunctional. Just go back in your mind and relive the countless recesses, the inability to make a decision, to move forward, to bring people together, to do the hard work that is necessary to reach compromise. And so as a result, for the second time in as many years, just go back to the fiscal session last year when we should have fixed these problems, not a single bill to address the cliff moved out of the House of Representatives for consideration by the Senate. Completely unacceptable. We have to do better. So it's back to the drawing board, but I guess not really, because the problem isn't going to change. We know what it is. We've been facing it for a while. The options aren't going to change. They're going to be the same ones that we had last year and this year. But we better change. we better get serious and collectively summon the courage necessary to address this problem. And I guess in the meantime, this will be the opportunity for those in the legislature who insist that the state of Louisiana can simply cut its way to solving the cliff. They get a chance starting next week to show us how they would do that. We'll see if they can pass a budget with $692 million less in state general fund next fiscal year than we have this year. I don't believe it's possible. I've said that before. I know it isn't possible to budget responsibly and to adequately fund our most critical priorities at that level, because the cuts will be horrendous and they will be deep, even in our most critical priorities, especially health care, but also higher education and across the state budget. As a result, I've already asked President Alario and Speaker Barras to adjourn the regular session in mid-May. Doing so will allow us to have a special session that would conclude by June the 4th, which is the scheduled adjournment day of the next regular session, so that the taxpayers wouldn't have to worry about any additional cost of that special session. And also so that we can get this problem resolved fully with almost a month before this fiscal year ends, so the state agencies, higher education, and all of the people across Louisiana will know what to expect come July 1st of next year. I'm hopeful we can do it. We need to do it. It's clear that up to now there's been a lack of sense of urgency. I think that will change as we get closer to July 1st. But I think it'll also be instructive as legislators wrestle with the budget and actually see the choices that they're going to have to make to try to fashion a budget with $694 million less in state general fund than they have this year. And when you include matching federal dollars, it's in the billions of dollars less than we have this year. So I am as committed as ever, as dedicated as ever. We must fix the cliff in a way that promotes fairness, predictability, and stability. We can do it. We must do it if the state is going to maintain the momentum that it has right now on so many fronts. Unemployment, job creation, economic development wins, the stability we have finally created in higher education by funding it for the first time in a decade without a cut relative to the previous year, and fully funding the TOPS program. And in so many areas as well. We have to maintain this momentum, but that means we have to fix the cliff. So when we come back a week from tonight to get started, I hope and pray we will do that, all the legislators and myself, not thinking and acting as Democrats, Republicans, and independents, but as Louisianans. Worried about Louisianans, not about scoring political victories, not about depriving others of some opportunity for success, because I'll tell you, this isn't about my success. This is about the success of our children and our grandchildren across the state of Louisiana. So I remain committed. I actually believe we will get it done. I'm reminded of how hard it was 2 years ago. And so I'm heartened that we can get this done. I believe we will. I ask you to join me in that effort and join your prayers to mine. And I would ask God to continue to bless the United States and the great state of Louisiana. And at this time, I'll take questions. Yes, sir.
So, obviously, regular session starts a week from today. Not much time for lawmakers to cool down. Do you see this changing the precedent, the tone over the next 3 months?
We better find a way to do that. The level of acrimony and distrust is beyond anything that I've seen in the 10 years that I've been involved in state government. And I hope that we can, because the truth of the matter is the overwhelming vast majority of people here, regardless of party, House, Senate, are good, honorable, decent people trying to do what they believe is right. We just have to work harder I think, to make sure that we are civil in our discussions, and that we are earnest in our efforts, and that everyone believes that we are in good faith, regardless of whether they agree with whatever it is that we're trying to do. Tyler?
You talk about good faith and civil discussions, and yet you tonight have called out the speaker publicly in a way that you have not wanted to do so before. Do the two equate?
Yes. They do. Because I called him out in a very civil and factual way. I related facts about the proposal, his proposal that he put on the table, and how he walked away from it the very first day of the special session without even the courtesy of a phone call to me. And that is what turned the session on its ear and made it very, very difficult to recover. And then after he creates the revenue problem by backing away from $220 million worth of revenue he had previously supported, he then blamed others when they went to him to ask him to consider other revenue measures that would replace that void. And he said it was they and not he who had caused that problem. So we can do better, but we're not going to do better if we continue to ignore the things that people are doing that are causing the problems. Yes, ma'am.
So the last time we saw a budget from you all, it was, there was not the federal income tax money in it. That $300 million, do you have a list of where you would backfill cuts?
Yeah, don't cut us short. It's $302 million.
302?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
what's the priority for getting
well, you all will see that, but right now, the $302 million, and what she's talking about is the federal tax reforms that were enacted by Congress in December should yield an additional $302 million in revenue to the state of Louisiana in the next fiscal year. That, however, has not been recognized by the REC. And until the REC does that, we won't be coming forward with our proposals, although we certainly are working on them. It will happen at the next time the REC meets. We suspect they will be asked. I can't tell you whether they will recognize it. That's their job. But the next time the REC meets, they will be taking up the question of whether to recognize the $302 million. And so the Speaker and the President and I discussed that today. It is possible that that meeting could happen by the end of next week, in which case we would be releasing the list of our priorities for that $302 million. But I can tell you this, $302 million doesn't go very far when you've got $994 million in needs as evidenced by the fall off in general fund. And then if you remember what I said earlier, even if we had the $994 million, there's an additional $120 million in cuts beyond that. So the $302 million won't do very much. I mean, obviously, it's welcome. We're glad to have it. It beats the heck out of going backwards, but it won't do as much as you might think. Sue?
Governor, you addressed civility of the legislature. There was something said on the House floor the other night, and we understand that you requested that member of the legislature to come and visit with you. Were you ever able to resolve that with Mr. Seabaugh?
No. He didn't come up, and we have not yet had a chance to visit. I hope that will happen. You know, you need to remember Representative Seabaugh is the guy who said, I didn't go to the U.S. Army Ranger School. Do you remember hearing things like that? So I lost not a moment's sleep the other night. You can be assured of that. Melinda?
Governor, when we talked to the speaker earlier, he suggested that part of the problem with getting anything passed and the failure rested with you and your inability to get Democrats on the same page, specifically members of the Black Caucus.
Yeah.
Do you see Democrats being a united front in this?
Yeah, but let me tell you, the Speaker has to say something. He is the individual who abandoned his own proposal to me, his own commitment, on the very first day of the session, and blew a hole in the revenue that he said he was committed to. And then he found fault with Democratic members, especially those of the Black Caucus, who went to him and said, okay, if you don't want to do that, then would you consider other revenue measures in order to make up the difference? Because at least they were responsible enough to know that they needed to fill the entire cliff. knowing what the cuts would be if they did not. So are we united? Yes. Now, let me tell you, as governor, I pushed the Republicans from right to left and the Democrats left to right so that we can fashion a compromise in the middle. That is not always easy. And when I do that, there are some times when there is tension between myself and individual members regardless of party. But I believe it is my job to push people to come together, and I will continue to do that because there is no other way we will ever be successful. The long-term solutions for our most pressing problems come from the center of the political spectrum, and I will be continuing to push Republicans to the center and Democrats to the center to get enough votes there to fix our problems. Yes, ma'am.
You suggested the speaker abandoned the agreement to fix the fiscal cliff, but why do you think that happened? What led to?
You know, I really don't know. He never called to tell me that he was backing away from his commitment. So I don't know what led him to do that, but I do know that it caused tremendous problems that we never recovered from in this session. Yes, sir.
Governor, you had a Republican go on the House floor and essentially say that his own party is, some members are tanking this special session and special sessions before it, essentially to have you as a
Yeah.
one-term governor. Do you have a response to that?
Well, I think there were 3 Republicans who said something similar to that last Friday night. And there's no doubt in my mind that there are some members of the Republican House, some Republican members in the House, I should say, who are motivated by that. I don't think that that accurately depicts the intentions of the majority of folks down there. But it is an issue, and it's not about me. This is about the state of Louisiana and whether we're going to have the opportunity we want for our kids and grandkids here. And it's not, I don't lie awake at night worrying that they're hurting me. First of all, I don't think that they are, because the people of Louisiana are smart enough and they're paying attention and they're watching to see who the obstructionists are, who the people who are being unreasonable. And so every time they do that to try to score political points against me, my best guess is that they're actually hurting themselves instead. But that's not important to me either. What is important to me is they're hurting the state of Louisiana, because we have a big problem to fix. And so long as they are motivated by that, then they're not focused on fixing the problem. Yes, ma'am.
One more question. Governor, some Democrats in the House had expressed concern about the contingency amendment that was added.
Yeah.
You had agreed to those items. You said that you were already working on work requirements. Members of your administration testified on behalf of these items. I guess, can you just speak to that?
Sure. First of all, we committed to support the budget reforms provided 2 things happen. One is we fixed the cliff, as I identified it, at $994 million. Secondly, that we would not approve something in advance, just carte blanche, but that we would work with them, and if we ever got the instruments to where we could support them, we would. And we did work in good faith to do that. And I will tell you, at the end of the day, the so-called budget reforms, by the way, none of them did anything to solve the cliff. Several of them had substantial costs associated with them. But at the end of the day, they were not measures that were objectionable to me as governor in the sense of what they actually did. In terms of the work requirement bill by Frank Kaufman, I think he worked hard and in good faith, and we actually fashioned a bill that would have required community engagement so that we would find those individuals out there who probably had some sort of impediment to gainful employment, whether it be transportation or housing or education or training, and we would have engaged those individuals in order to try to make sure that they could do better, but not with an eye towards being punitive, not with an eye towards kicking anybody off of Medicaid. And by the way, we're trying to fix the budget of the state of Louisiana. For every individual who is kicked off Medicaid expansion, you go from paying for no more than 10% of their health care from a statutory dedication to 40% of their health care from the general fund. And it's the general fund that's short. Because if you make them uninsured, that's what it costs us, 40% of their health care from the general fund. So this was never about being punitive. It was never about trying to kick people off of Medicaid, but it was about outreach to people and trying to help them. And by the way, you can pretty well assume that anyone who is in that category who isn't working today, if you're able to help them get a job, they're not going to automatically go to making 138% or more federal poverty level anyway. But you could have assisted them to improve their lives, help them to make more money than they were currently making. And I think that that is the approach that we need to go in. Now, one of the things that poisoned the well here were some of the statements made by those who were proposing more draconian measures. And you know, hopefully we can get past that. And I'd like to be able to build upon this exercise that we went through in this special session so that moving forward, we can fashion a proposal that does the things that I just mentioned and not take a punitive approach towards people. Because kicking people off of health care is not a good idea, especially when it costs you more money when they become uninsured than it does to give them insurance. Look, I am actually more optimistic than you might imagine that we're going to get these problems fixed. We're about to have a big educational session that starts next Monday. And I think those people who just sort of in the blind say, yeah, we can get this done. We don't need any more revenue. We've got a, whatever they say, we've got a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Now is their time to step forward and demonstrate that. I don't think they're going to be successful. And then we're going to be able to focus on the task at hand. And that is going to be fixing the cliff in a way that adequately funds our priorities, restores promise to our future, and make sure that our kids have every opportunity to be successful here in Louisiana. I will devote every minute of every day to making sure that happens until it does. God bless you. Thank you very much. Approach to forward and demonstrate that. I don't think they're going to be successful, and then we're going to be able to focus on the task at hand, and that is going to be fixing the cliff in a way that adequately funds our priorities, restores promise to our future, and make sure that our kids have every opportunity to be successful here in Louisiana. I will devote every minute of every day to making sure that happens until it does. God bless you. Thank you very much.